Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone here today. We're going to jump right back into the book of Joshua. If you want to turn to chapter 8. Chapter 8 of the book of Joshua. We've been going through the Old Testament book by book, chapter by chapter, to see what all these different stories mean, how they fit together, and how we can use them. And we've been going through the book of Joshua, and it seems like every single chapter we've learned something different or new about who God is or how he relates to his people. The first one was, will God still be with Israel the same way he was with Moses? Now that Moses is gone, the answer was yes. And then they sent the spies into the land, and they came across a lady named Rahab. And we found out what it means, not just for God to be faithful to Israel as a nation, but on a personal level. What does it mean to be a follower of God on a personal level? And it has a lot more to do with just your genetics or your inheritance, which family you're born into. Because Rahab turned her back on her own people and her own gods and her own way of life, decided to be faithful to the God of Israel, and sure enough, she was brought into the Israelite family, married into the tribe of Judah, and found herself in the family tree of the Messiah himself. Then they went into the city of Jericho. God, sure enough, he defeated Jericho. He brought them down in a resounding way, and it really was a resounding way, because they used sound, didn't they? The trumpets and the shouts and all the stuff, and the walls just came tumbling down, as the song says, and they ran in and they conquered Jericho, and everything was great, except for one thing. One guy, one single individual decided to steal about 5 pounds of silver, about 1.25 pounds of gold, and a fancy Armani sport coat suit, and he buried him in his tent. Just over 1 pound of gold and 5 pounds of silver. That's all it took. One guy, out of all the thousands of soldiers, one guy decided to disobey. So after the resounding victory at Ai, Joshua said, hey, let's go up Jericho. Joshua said, hey, let's go take this little town next door. It's nothing, just send a few thousand troops, it'll be no big deal. So they just went up. They tried to take the town, but they were turned around and absolutely humiliated by this little podunk town out in the middle of nowhere, Ai. And Israel was defeated, and Joshua can't figure out what's going on, and he's down in the dirt, and he's rolling around, and he's crying to God, what's going on, what's going on? God looks at him and says, stand up. What are you doing, Mr. Strong and Courageous Guy? Get up out of the dirt. The problem you lost is because somebody disobeyed me. And you read that passage, you think, wow, this must be a widespread disobedience, some kind of major rebellion going on. No, they started casting the lots, whatever that meant, the random thing that God directed to help make decisions. And they narrowed it down to one guy named Achan. One guy. And Achan said, yeah, I did. I took stuff that God told me not to take, and it's buried in my tent. Go get it. So sure enough, they dug it up. There it was. Guilty as charged. And so they took him out back, he and his family, and his cows, and his sheep, and his dogs, and his puppies, and his kitties, everything, his tent, everything got demolished. Family wiped out of the Israelite line and the heritage and the lineage there. And we compared at the end of last week, Rahab and Achan. I said, I think we can draw a comparison between these two. On a personal level, it's all about a personal decision. Either you're going to follow and be obedient, or you're not going to follow and you're going to be disobedient. Rahab had everything going against her, and yet she obeyed, and she was brought in to God's protected and chosen people. Achan had everything going for him. He was of the tribe of Judah, good family, but he decided to disobey and not follow what God said. He was the rebel. And sure enough, he was taken out and eliminated from the line of the Israelites, and eliminated from any line and even breathing, because they stoned him and killed him and burned him. And that was the end of Achan. And so we can see the contrast between the two. On a national level, God promised he would be with Israel, again, in proportion to their obedience. We've already seen that. But on a personal level, it's also a personal decision. You can choose to or not to obey and follow God. And that's the determining factor. Not, I have Abraham as my father, because we mentioned the New Testament passage last week. Jesus said to the Pharisees, I could take some stones and turn them into Abraham's children if I want. That's not a problem. What we want is people who are faithful and obeying God and trying to serve him. That's where we left Joshua last week. Well, in chapter 8, they decide to take another crack at Ai, don't they? Last time they suffered humiliating defeat. Joshua was concerned about all the other cities looking at this and seeing Israel's perceived weakness and banding together and trying to attack them. And in fact, that's exactly what happens in a couple chapters. We'll see that this morning. But they decided to take out Ai first. But this time, there is no sin found in Israel, and God is on their side. And so God says to Joshua, all right, Joshua, it's time to take this town. In chapter 8, verse 1, the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear, don't be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you and arise and go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, and his people and his city and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. In other words, kill everybody. Except, he says, only take its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. Lay an ambush against the city behind it. God said, destroy and kill everybody in the land of Canaan in this town, which God had told them beforehand. That's what you're supposed to do to all the cities. But this time, the stuff in the city can be yours. You can take it, you can plunder it, you can bury it in your tent, whatever you want to do, you can have the stuff. Kill all the people, the plunder is yours. The first fruit, God said, Jericho, the first attack, the first plunder, that's mine. Just with all the first fruits, we see this throughout the Old Testament. The first bit of reward is God's, dedicated to him. After that, it's all yours. So go in, take the city, kill everybody, and keep the stuff for yourself. If only Achan had waited one more city, everything would have been so much better. He could have had all the stuff he wanted, but he didn't. So here's what he said. All right, God says to Joshua, here's what you do. You're going to take the bulk of the army and go hide in the back of the city, kind of in the trees and the scrub brush back there. You're going to take a small detachment of good fighting guys and go up front, just like last time. Here's how it's going to go. You're going to walk up to the town and say, aha, we are here to attack you, Ai. The men of Ai will look out and say, don't those guys ever learn the lesson? I thought we beat them up enough the first time. But if they're back for more, we'll beat them up again. That's fine. All the guys come running out of the city. They will chase you. You'll pretend to be afraid. You'll turn and you'll run back down the hill just like you did before. And they'll chase you with their swords drawn just like they did before. But when you get far enough away from the city, Joshua, you hold up your javelin or make this sign, and the guys behind the city will see the sign, and they will run into what is now the unprotected city of Ai. And you'll run in, you'll capture the city, and you'll set it on fire, and you'll burn it to the ground. Take all the goodies out quick, and stuff them in your pockets. Burn the city to the ground. So that's what they did. The detachment, they went up, we're going to attack you, Ai, and they go running back down the hill. The Ai guys say, ha, we'll get you again, ha, 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 and they go running down the hill after him. The whole group, all the men, the fighting men of Ai go running down after this detachment of Israelites. The main army sneaks in the back, they set the town on fire, and at the bottom of the hill, when they know what the plan is, the Israelite guys stop, and they turn around. Have you ever seen like those old Warner Brother, like the Bugs Bunny or Wile E. Coyote cartoons or whatever, and Sylvester the cat is chasing Tweety the bird, or Yosemite Sam is chasing bugs or whatever it is, and they come to a cliff or something, and they run off the cliff, and the good guy kind of stands there in the air somehow, and the bad guy's still chasing him because he doesn't realize he's walking in the air, right? And the good character turns around and just kind of smiles and points down, and the bad guy kind of gets a weird look on his face, and he looks down, then he realizes he's standing in midair, and then he starts to fall. Have you ever seen those cartoons? You know what I'm talking about from a long time ago? That's kind of how I picture this scenario going, right? The guys of Ai, they've run out after the small detachment of Israelites. The Israelites know the timing, they know what's going on, they see out of the corner of their eye what the Ai guys don't see. They see the smoke from the city. So the Israelite guys stop and turn around, and the Ai guys say, wait a minute, why did you stop? You're supposed to be afraid. And the Israelite guys smile and go, hee, 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 hee. And the Ai guys turn around and they see the smoke of their undefended city going up in the air, and they realize, oh, we've made a catastrophic mistake. We are in serious trouble. We're standing in midair and we're about to plunge to our deaths and make the sound that the cartoons make, poof at the bottom. We have made a catastrophic calculational mistake here because we've left our city unguarded. And now we've been tricked, and now our city, we have no city to go back to. They've conquered it, they've burned it, they've probably killed everybody in it, and we are out here undefended, alone with these Israelites who, for some reason, don't seem to be so afraid anymore. And the Israelites they were chasing turn around and start attacking the guys from Ai, and they're ferocious, and of course God is with them, and so they start to win, and it's an amazing battle for the Israelites. Chapter 8, verse 24, when Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness, where they pursued them, and all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all of Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. But Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin, this sign for the people, until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as their plunder, according to the word of the Lord that he had commanded Joshua. And it's amazing, amazing victory after such an amazing defeat. And we see that, sure enough, now that the people are back with God, even the most embarrassing defeats can become wonderful victories. This is yet another reminder that their success is totally dependent on God. And we mentioned this last week. The subtitle for this whole book is what? God brings them into the land, and he blesses them with victories in proportion to their obedience. Yeah, and that's exactly what we see over and over throughout the book. And what God said in Deuteronomy is exactly playing out the way he said it would. As long as you follow me, I will bless you, I'll give you victory, all the good things will happen to you, but as soon as you turn away and start disobeying, I will be against you, I will not fight for you, you will be defeated. And that's exactly what's playing out, sure enough. That brings us to, let's just read a couple more verses out of chapter 8, verse 30, because this is interesting. It comes from Deuteronomy. At that time, verse 30, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal. Does anybody remember Mount Ebal before? We talked about that in the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Does everybody remember Mount Ebal? If you don't, we're going to keep reading, see if it comes back to you. Verse 31, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it's written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones, which no man has wielded an iron tool. They offered burnt offerings on it and stuff. Verse 33, and all of Israel, sojourners as well as the native born, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first to bless the people of Israel. And afterward he'd read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curse, according to all that's written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women, and the little ones, and the sojourners who lived among them. Just like Moses commanded, here they are, parked against the two mountains, half the tribes over here, half the tribes over there. And they're using that natural echo chamber to read all of the law of Moses to all the people and to remind them of everything that God had taught. And the people are echoing back and forth the blessings and the cursings back and forth off the mountain, Deuteronomy 28. Here's what happens if you obey. Here's what happens if you disobey. You'll be blessed if you obey in all these things. You'll be cursed in all these things if you disobey. Back and forth, just like Moses said to do. And here's the ritual that God gave for them to perform once they get into the land. And now they're standing there in the land. They've had their two first victories. Their two cities have been taken down, and they now own that real estate in the new land. And they're taking a moment to remind themselves and echo back and forth. After the catastrophic disobedience of Achan, now they've seen a little bit of the consequence of disobedience, haven't they? And they're reading these blessings and cursings back and forth to the people, just the way that God commanded Moses. That brings us to chapter 9. Because the Israelites have a reputation now in the land. Word spreads quick when a major city falls and then another city falls, and the people of Israel are there and they seem unstoppable, except for that one little Ai thing, which probably the rest of the Canaanites didn't quite understand what happened there. But they're a threatening presence. And some of all the cities, they're trying to decide what to do about this. In fact, chapter 9, verse 1, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan and the hill country, and then the lowland along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, and it names all of them there, it says they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. Their backs are in the corner. They know their lives are threatened. We have to stop these people. If we don't, we will all die. And so they all come together and say our best chance is to all band together as one big army, form a coalition and go against go against the Israelites, try to defeat them at once. Except for some of them were a little bit smarter. Look at verse 3. It said, when the inhabitants of Gibeon, which is another one of the cities, heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they on their part acted with cunning. They used their brains instead of their swords. And they went and they made ready provisions and took out worn-out sacks for the donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. How then can we make a covenant with you? See, God had told them before they went into the land, everybody in the land of Canaan, there are to be no peace treaties. There are to be no covenants, no deals, no truces. Kill them all, take no prisoners. But the people that live outside of the land that I'm going to give you, you're not to destroy all of them, because I haven't given you their land. I gave you this land, not that land. So people in this land, you have to wipe out, judge, and destroy. People that live outside the land, you are allowed to make a peace treaty with them, a peace treaty with them. We'll not attack you, you don't attack us, let's all get along and be happy. You can do that for people outside of the land. I don't know if the Gibeonites were aware of this command God gave them, or if they just kind of got lucky and were hoping this worked out for them. I frankly don't know. But they just lived a couple miles down the road, and so they got their worn-out, dry, crumbly bread, and their worn-out wineskins, and they made sure all their Coca-Cola was flat and not fizzy anymore, and all the things. And they packed up all these old, their old clothes, their worn-out shoes, and they look all dirty and tired and bedraggled, and they hop on their donkeys and they clip-clop over the hill, and they go to Joshua and the leaders, and they say, "Oh, Joshua, whew, are we so glad to see you. We've been traveling for so long, and we've come so far." And they say, "How do we know that you've come so far?" Now that's a weird question, isn't it? Because they happen to have a secret weapon, the Israelites do. What is their secret weapon? They just so happen to have an omniscient, all-knowing God on their side, with a Levitical priest that can go to them to get any answers they need. They have it all. But they look at him sideways and say, "How do we know that you've traveled so far?" And so they say, "Well, look, I'll show you." So they bring out this dry, crumbly bread, and they say, "See, we just baked this before we left on our trip, but now it's all dry and moldy and gross and disgusting and yucky. And look at these wineskins. This was brand new. We just filled them up before we left, but now they have holes in them. They're leaking everywhere, and it's kind of gross and yucky. And look at this," they said, and they reached in their saddlebag, and they brought out a pack of Twinkies, and they said, "Look, Twinkies never go bad. And look, they're getting all crusty. They never go bad. We've been on the road for decades. These things can withstand anything, but look, they're not even chewy anymore. They're kind of gross." And the Israelites look at the Twinkies, and they say, "Wow, this is serious evidence. You have to have come from a long way from home, because Twinkies never go bad, and your Twinkies are yucky." And so they decide to make a treaty with them. They say, "All right, we will make a covenant with you. We will not attack or kill or destroy you and your people, and you won't attack and destroy us. Deal?" "Deal," they say. And in verse 14, so the men took some of their provisions, and they looked over all this stuff, but it said, what? In verses 14 and 15. Here's the verses that get us. Here's what gets us in trouble. "So the men took some of their provisions, but they did not" what? "Oh, they did not ask the counsel of the Lord." What's going on? What's the problem? Why? They did not ask counsel from the Lord. "And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them, 'We promise you on the name and reputation of our God and us as Israel people, we will not attack you guys. We make a covenant of peace with you. We will not destroy or kill you guys.' And the Gibeonites said," "Thank you very much. Sign on the dotted line really quickly, please. Don't think too long about this. Sign. Good. Roll it up. Boop, we're out." And they take off, right? And about 3 days go by. 3 days go by in verse 16. We're not going to read it. But somehow the Israelites found out that they had been tricked. "Oh, we feel so stupid," they say. And all the leaders of Israel did what? You know that thing where you take your hand and you go like that? There was a collective slapping sound all throughout the leadership of Israel as they each slapped their own foreheads, saying, "What have we done? Why did we do that? We had an omniscient God on our side. We could have asked him, and they could have told us what was going on, but we didn't. We trusted the Twinkies and not our God. Why did we do this?" So in verse 18, the people of Israel didn't attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord. At that point, it was too late, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. All the people said, "You leaders are not very good at your jobs, are you? You could have gone to God at any time and found out the truth, and you trusted the Twinkies. You are kind of stupid leaders. You're not very good." Verse 19, "But all the leaders said to the congregation," yes, this is true, "But we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we'll do to them. We'll let them live, lest wrath be upon us for breaking the truce and the covenant, because the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became woodcutters and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. We cannot touch them. We've made a covenant with them. Now the covenant, you will notice, was made under false pretenses. It was a faulty, deceptive covenant. So the question is, are the Israelites still bound to honor an oath that was made under false pretenses? What do you think? The next obvious question after that is, are we today bound to keep promises that we make, even if we don't understand the situation, but we still make the promise? What does God say? What do you think? Do they have to keep it? Should they have kept it? Was it the right thing to do to keep it? Or should they have said, you guys lied to us, we didn't know what was going on, we're going to kill you anyway because this covenant is invalid because you tricked us? Oh, what do you think? It reminds me of another verse in Psalms, doesn't it? Psalm 15, you can turn there if you want to or not. Psalm chapter 15 talks about what does it look like, what do people look like who please God? Psalm chapter 15, verse 1, a psalm of David. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? Who gets to live and be close to you, God? Not just physically, but relationally. Who gets to live with you? Who is your chosen people? Who are you pleased with? What do these people look like? And he gives a whole list here. I'm not going to read all of them. He who walks blamelessly, speaks truth in his heart, doesn't slander, et cetera, all the way down. But in chapter 4, we see, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, who honors those who fear the Lord. What's the last phrase there of verse 4? Another quality of a person who God is pleased in. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. What does that mean? Who swears to his own hurt but does not change. He who makes a promise and probably later realizes that it is no longer in his best interest to keep this promise or covenant, and yet he what? Still keeps the covenant. That's a hard one. Yeah, if we make a deal or a promise or a contract or sign on the dotted line, and we realize that somebody has been less than forthcoming with their side of the story, but we've promised, we've made the deal, we've signed on the dotted line, are we still to keep our promise? If we've given our word, if we've said, yes, we will do this. Yeah, it kind of looks that way, doesn't it? And that's what the Israelites did. Now, I'm aware that Psalm 15 was not written in Joshua's day yet. I get it. But the principle is the same. And they kept their word, which was the right thing to do. Was it embarrassing to the Israelites? I'm sure it absolutely was. In fact, the verse says so. Did it make the leadership look really bad in the eyes of the Israelite people? Yes, it did. The passage we just read says so. Did it cause them harm ultimately? Well, yeah, God told them to destroy everybody. Now they made a covenant not to destroy everybody. That puts them in a pickle. Either way, they're disobeying God, but at least this way they're keeping the oath that they made to the people, and God's integrity is not made to look bad because of the breaking of the covenant. So they have to let the Gibeonites live. But if only they just asked God first. Why would they not do that? Why? And they got themselves in such a predicament for being impulsive, trusting their Twinkies, I guess, is what they did. Why would they do that? And we see another mistake here, the Gibeonite mistake, but they tricked them into a covenant that they shouldn't have signed, but they did, and now they're bound to it. But that doesn't still solve the problem of all the other kings who were not the Gibeonites, and there's about 3 or 4 cities there that banded with the Gibeonites to do all this, and so the treaty covered all 4 of them. But all the rest of the kings say, we are still in trouble. And now we're not only in trouble because of the Israelites, now we've lost some of our best fighters because those Gibeonites, those are pretty good soldiers. Now they're not on our side anymore. I don't think we can defeat Israel at this point, but at least we can take our vengeance on the Gibeonites. So let's at least go beat up these guys because they double-crossed us. They double-crossed us when we needed them most. They sided with the enemy. Now we don't like them. And so they all come together, all these kings, and they say, we are going to attack the Gibeonites. Chapter 10, verse 5. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, and the king of Jerusalem, and the king of Hebron, some names you'd know there, right? Jerusalem, which was not yet conquered, they came out to attack Israel. Hebron, which was the first capital city of Israel, where David ruled from for 7 years, they came out to attack, and all these other kings came out to attack. They gathered their forces, went up the hill with all their armies, and camped against Gibeon to make war against them. You double-crossed us. You turned to the enemy. You're a traitor. We're at least going to kill you before they kill us because of what you did to us. Verse 6, the men of Gibeon said to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, oh, hey, we have a contract. You remember that? We are allies now, and we are under attack. He said, don't relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. Joshua, it's time to call in a favor because you signed a contract with us. We are under attack. Now you have to come and protect us. And the very people that they were supposed to have killed in the first place, now they have to defend against the other guys. So now they're drawn into this war. And so they go up. Verse 10. And the Lord threw these kings into a panic, though. He said, these other guys, you are still to wipe them out, and I am still on your side. Verse 10. The Lord threw the other kings into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent to Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Madkedah. And they fled before Israel while they were going down to the ascent of Beth-horon. God threw them into a panic. He let the Israelites win. They're chasing them. They're on the run. They're running down the hills. They're fleeing. They're hiding in the bushes. But just in case you thought they had a chance, we continue on, as if the sword wasn't enough. The end of verse 11. The Lord threw down large hailstones from heaven on them, as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with a sword. These poor guys, they just can't win. Either we stay here and get killed with a sword, we run away and hide, and God throws ice balls at us until we die. These poor guys, you got to wonder what's going through these soldiers' mind. How are we supposed to defeat these guys? There's no way. And as if that wasn't enough, their probably last thought was, if only we can hold out till nightfall so that we can hide in the bushes and maybe find a way to sneak away and at least save ourselves and retreat. Which is probably the best plan they had going for them, right? Until you get to verse 12 and 13. So Joshua prays to God, and he says, it says in verse 12, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. They can't even count on nightfall coming, of all the things. These poor soldier guys, I kind of feel bad for them almost. They are 100% doomed. They cannot win. If it's not the sword, it's the hailstones from God. If it's not the hailstones, God stopped the sun so we can't even sneak away under cover of darkness. What are we supposed to do? It says, end of verse 13, is this not written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. That, I love that. That's just a fascinating statement to me. God has never responded to a person's request in the grand scale of this before or since, but God was fighting for Israel. He said, you're doing what you're supposed to do, at least now. You're trying to kill off all these guys who are attacking you. I will do whatever it takes to make sure you win. I'll throw ice balls. I will stop the sun in the middle of the sky for an entire day so these guys can't even hide under cover of darkness until you slaughter every last one of them. And it says God never listened to a man with such a large request like he did that day so that they could defeat the enemy the way that they did. So yes, the Amorite kings. You continue on down, it gives a list of some of the kings there. But at the end of chapter 10, it says, so Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country, and the Negeb, and the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but devoted to destruction all that breathed, just as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. And Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon, but no farther, and he didn't kill the Gibeonites. Verse 42, and Joshua captured all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. Great, huge victories, wonderful times, excellent success, because they're obeying God and following what he said. It's simple, at least in concept. In practice, it turns out to be problematic, and we'll continue to see that. Continuing in verse 11, it lists a bunch of the other conquests and wars that they fought here. We'll not read through all those. Just a couple highlights. Verse 15 of chapter 11, they did all these things in battles and stuff. Verse 15, just as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. And I know all the details and names of the battles and stuff don't mean as much to us, but I think this highlight is really the point of the passage here. They have success because they obeyed. More success because they obeyed. More success because they obeyed. Verse 18 of chapter 11. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel, except for the Hivites and the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took them all in battle, for it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle. God hardened their hearts. You remember that phrase from Pharaoh as well, and he did it again here. He incited them to attack Israel so that he could give Israel the victory and destroy them. He set them up to lose is what he did, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 21, and Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. Remember what Anakim are? The Anakites. Those would be the giants, yeah, the ones that the initial generation of Israelites said, oh no, there's giants in the land. They will eat us alive. They'll nibble us like Cheerios or whatever it is they said. We'll be destroyed. These are the guys they just wiped out. Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. That's an interesting phrase. Three little pockets there left of Anakim giants. In fact, one of these giants shows up later in the scriptures, doesn't it, and becomes quite famous. What's one of the famous Anakim from one of these cities that shows up later? Name is what? Yeah, good job, everybody. Brownie points for you. Goliath. Goliath is one of these remaining Anakites from Gath who shows up later to fight a little tiny boy named David. Yeah, sure enough. Continuing on. Verse 23, so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord has spoken to Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. And now the land is conquered. Verse 12 continues to talk about more kings and more defeats and stuff. I think it's probably kind of a flashback or a summary of all the things they had done. Verse 13 also continues in that somewhat. Verse 13 starts what I call the next section of the book, the settling and distribution of the land. This half of Joshua, that is the right slide, right? I can't quite see up there. Yes, okay, good. Chapters 13 through 24, the war is basically over now. They've conquered most of the land. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So this half of the book of Joshua is where God officially keeps the second part of his promise to Abraham, the land. Each tribe receives a specified area of land as their own inheritance, just as God promised. God had driven out the other nations, just like he promised. Sprinkled throughout God's fulfillment to the tribes in general are even some specific promises and rewards that remind us of God's faithfulness and concern for his people. We will not read through all the detailed list of boundaries and cities and landmarks and all that kind of stuff. We will not do that. But just a couple of goodies sprinkled in here. Chapter 14, verse 6, he said, Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Remember, 10 were bad, 2 were good. He was one of the 2 good. And I brought him word again, as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you've wholly followed the Lord my God. Everywhere you've looked and spied out, Caleb, that will be your land because of the good report you brought. And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive just as he said for these 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke his word to Moses while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength is now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. He says, I'm every bit as fit and virile as I was back in my 40s. He says, this 85-year-old guy. Now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said. Caleb says, that's supposed to be my hill. That's supposed to be my farmland up there. I know there's giants up there, and I'm 85 years old, but I'm going to go, and I'm just going to drive out those massive giants and kill them all. Bring them on. I can take them because God's fighting with me, says the 85-year-old guy. And he takes his cane and he just starts walking up the hill, swinging his sword. I'll get you guys, you whippersnappers. Get off my lawn, he says. And he charges up the hill to take out these giants. Verse 13, Joshua blessed him, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jeshurun, for an inheritance. Therefore, Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, son of Jeshurun, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, the name of the Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. So this is Anakite Central, their stronghold. And here goes 85-year-old Joshua charging up the hill, saying, I'll take you all, bring them on. And sure enough, he does. In fact, the story continues in verse 13 of chapter 15. According to the commandment of the Lord Joshua, he gave Caleb the son of Jeshurun a portion of the people among Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak, who is the father of the Anakites, which is the giants, right? Okay. Verse 14, and Caleb drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak, and their names them there, the descendants of Anak, all these giant guys, these huge guys. And he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. Now Debir was formerly Kiriath Sefer, and Caleb said, whoever strikes these guys and captures it, to him I will give Achsah, my daughter, as his wife. If you go up and capture this town, you can have my daughter. Ta-da, prize. Everybody go fight. And Othniel, verse 17, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it. So his nephew went up and he says, oh, capture it. And he goes up and he captures the city, and he gave him Ashkenaz, his daughter, as his wife. A little bit weird, kind of close relation, but back in the day, that's another lesson. But this guy, Othniel, goes up and he captures the city. Othniel. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? If you're not familiar, it might not yet. Keep this name in mind, because next week we will talk some more about this very Othniel. Okay? Don't forget that name. So when she came to him, verse 18, she urged him to ask for a field. She got off her donkey, said, give me some water as well. And so he did. So he takes very good care of the family, and God provides for all of them. Zelophehad's daughters in chapter 17. Do you remember these ladies? We talked about them a long time ago. And again, why does Joshua include these little orphan girls? Again, to show the consistency and the amount of detail that God keeps his promises. Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, son of Gilead. This is chapter 17, verse 3. Had no sons, but only daughters. These are their names, and he gives the names. They approached Eleazar the priest. So the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance along with our brothers. So according to the mouth of the Lord, he gave them an inheritance with their brothers. Thus there fell to Manasseh 10 portions, and it talks about all the things there. Verse 16, because the daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance along with the sons, just like Moses had promised, and just like God had promised them. Oh boy, time is going, so much stuff to talk about. He also continues with talking about the cities of refuge, cities set aside where if you accidentally kill somebody, you can run and be safe in these cities so that nobody takes personal vengeance upon you, and you can await trial there to see if you're guilty or innocent. If you're innocent, you get to live in the city until the death of the high priest. He also talks about the Levite cities. There we go. The Levite cities that God promised to the Levites because they inherited no land. They inherit some of their own special cities scattered throughout the tribes of Israel. And it talks more about the inheritance allotment there going on all the way through chapter 21. And in the end of chapter 21, we get to the last couple chapters, verses 43 through 45, where it says, thus, after all this division and lot casting and border assignments and all this stuff, thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to their fathers. And they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of their enemies had withstood them. For the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. And if you don't care anything about the border assignments and the lot assignments and all that kind of stuff, this is the point of the passage right here. Every last thing that God promised to the people, he fulfilled to them. Every enemy was defeated. Every piece of land was given. Every promise to every person was kept. Everything God promised, all the way from Moses, all the way through Joshua, kept absolutely down to the very last detail. God kept all of his promises to the people. Whew. I love the book of Joshua, don't you? It's so happy. It's so successful. Enjoy it, because it won't last forever. In fact, even within Joshua, this fantastic book, even though this section of the book of Joshua is mostly one of obedience, blessing, and fulfillment, there are also some small hints of failure and faithlessness. These are the seeds of the problems to come in the book of Judges. Again, we'll go through these quickly. But chapter 13, verse 13, we see just a small little problem. It says, it's talking about conquering the land and the battles and stuff. But verse 13 says, "Yet the people of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maccathites. But Geshur and Maccath dwell in the midst of Israel to this day." They got sloppy. They quit before the job was done. And now they let some of the Canaanites that were supposed to have been killed, they let some of them live. And now they're even living among the Israelites to this day. Sounds like a minor thing, doesn't it? And for the moment, it kind of is. But we're going to see more of this later on. How about chapter 15? Chapter 15, verse 63 says, "But the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah, could not drive out. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day." Question, why was God not able to drive out the inhabitants of Jerusalem? Was God not strong enough to defeat Jerusalem? Come on. Was God not strong enough to defeat Jerusalem? The walls are too high, too thick, too good of a position. It wasn't God's fault. It was the people's fault because they failed to complete the job. Okay, chapter 16, verse 10. We see some more. "However, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have been made to do forced labor." Forced labor is great, but they're not supposed to be hauling wood. The only labor they're supposed to be doing is what? Pushing up daisies. Yes, that's their labor. Pushing up daisies. They're supposed to be dead, not hauling wood. That was the command, but they didn't do it. They didn't follow through. Chapter 17, verses 12 to 18. Pick it up in verse 14. "The people of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, 'Why have you given me but one lot in proportion of inheritance? Because I'm numerous.' Verse 15, Joshua said to them, 'If you're numerous people, go up by yourselves to the forest and clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you.' The people of Joseph said, 'The hill country is not enough for us, yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plains have chariots of iron, both those in Bashan and the villages and those in the valley of Jezreel.' Joshua said to the house of Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh, 'You are a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have only one allotment. But the hill country shall be yours, for though it's forest, you shall clear it and possess it to its farthest borders. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong.' They said, 'We can't defeat these people in the plain. The hill, fine, we'll go up and we'll march up the hill and clear some trees and we'll be all good. But the people in the plains, we can't beat them. They have what? They have iron chariots. They drive tanks. And clearly God is not strong enough to defeat an iron chariot tank. I don't think he can do it.' Joshua says, 'You're many people. You're strong. God's fighting for you. Go beat the iron chariots.' That's all there is to it. Now, did they do it? I'm not so sure about that. Chapter 19, verse 47 says, where am I at? When the territory of the people of Dan was lost to them, the people of Dan went up and fought against Leshem. And after capturing it and striking it with a sword, they took possession of it and settled in it, calling it Leshem, Dan, after the name of Dan, their ancestor. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the people of Dan, according to their clans. So they failed to defeat the place they were actually supposed to take, and so they kind of went next door to an easier-to-conquer place, and they conquered it instead. All these supposed failings, why the failures? Is God not delivering on his promise of victory? Or the people not following through on the command to obey? I think it's probably the latter of the two. Yeah, and that's going to cause some problems later on. That brings us to, chapter 23. I'd like to read it, but I don't have time. He's giving a charge to his people. He's saying, be strong and courageous It's interesting that at the beginning of the book, God is constantly telling Joshua to be strong and courageous, and now finally at the end of the book, he's gotten the idea, and Joshua in turn is telling his people, be strong and courageous, fight, obey, do what God says, and he will bless you. That brings us to chapter 24. Chapter 24, we see Joshua giving the people a history lesson, a reminder of all the things that God has done for them, and it brings us down to verse 14, where Joshua is directly addressing the people. He says, "Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in Egypt and serve the Lord. And if it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day who you'll serve." Joshua says, "Serve God and abandon the false gods." And in verse 18, the people reply, verse 16, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord. God's the one that did everything for us." Verse 18, "And the Lord drove out the peoples. Therefore we will serve the Lord, for he is our God." So Joshua says, serve God and abandon your false idols who are with you. And he says that in the present tense, as if they are already starting to adopt some of these gods of the people they've conquered. He says, you're already starting to disobey just a little bit. Turn away from these gods. And the people respond by saying, we will serve the Lord. Verse 19 and 20, "But Joshua said to the people, you're not able to serve the Lord, for he's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He won't forgive your sins. If you forsake and serve the foreign gods, he will turn on you and harm you." Verse 21, the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Verse 22, Joshua said to the people, "You're witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord and to serve him." And they say, "We are witnesses." Verse 23, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you." Present tense already. It didn't take long, did it? "And incline your heart to the Lord God of Israel." The people said to Joshua, "The Lord we will serve, and his voice we will obey." And so they made a covenant again, and they renewed this covenant. Over and over, Joshua says, abandon the false gods, serve God only. The people respond by saying, we will serve the Lord. But Joshua gave two commands, didn't he? I'm not sure how big of a deal to make out of this, if it's critical or not. Joshua says, serve God, abandon the idols. The people say, we will serve God, period. And it's that kind of duplicity and mixing of the religions that gets them in trouble in the book of Judges, isn't it? I'm not sure if that's a major point or not, I'll be honest. It was kind of just a figure of speech, or was that a serious problem? But I think it's probably a serious problem. They promised to follow God, but they didn't promise to abandon the idols. Oh, what a catastrophe. Brings us to the last couple verses of this book. The last couple verses draws this overall good book to a close. It's good because it reminds us of God's provision for his people and how great a leader Joshua was, but it's also concerning because Israel's worship of Yahweh was not supposed to come to a close. While Deuteronomy ended with Moses passing the baton to Joshua, there is no similar ending in this book, which leaves us with a different and kind of unsettling ending. In fact, verse 31 of chapter 24 says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. And that sounds like a pretty good verse, and it is. Israel served God as long as Joshua was there. But it kind of leaves something unsaid, doesn't it? It's like if I came up and asked you, hey, how was your day yesterday? And you said, well, it was going really, really great until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What's the implication? Something probably went awry after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? The morning was fine, but after 2, something didn't go so well. So when this verse says, Israel served the Lord greatly as long as Joshua and the elders were alive, what's the implication? I hate to see this verse. It's so terrible. And in fact, look at all the verses that surround it. Verse 29, after these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and they buried him in his own inheritance there that it talks about. Joshua dies. Verse 32, as for the bones of Joseph, which the Israelites carried up out of Egypt, they buried them at Shechem in the piece of land that Jacob brought from all the sons of Hamor, and it talks about it there. Verse 33, Eleazar the son of Aaron died, and they buried him at Gibeah, the town of Phinehas the son had given him in the hill country of Ephraim. This leader died, that icon died, this leader died. Verse 31, Israel followed the Lord all the time that the leaders were alive, but at the end of chapter 24, those leaders are no longer alive. And there's no passing of the baton. There's no future leadership designated here. It's with all this death and finality at the end of the book and lack of life and spiritual vitality that leads us into our descent, unfortunately, to the book of what? To the book of Judges. And I think we kind of have an inkling of what's coming up here, don't we? We're going to dive into it next week when we start the book of Judges. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you this morning for this book, all the super amazing victories you gave, all the provisions, all the promises kept. Joshua, overall, is such a wonderful book, and we can see your blessing and your strength and all these, your faithfulness, all these things that we can see throughout the book. And yet we can see some of our own human nature starting to come out, even in this good book too. Jobs left undone, lack of dedication to your commands, stuff like that. And finally, at the end, we see the good leaders dying off.